My slides.
Yes, we are.
Perfect. Ready. Okay. Sweet. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being at today's seminar, the few of you that are here. My name is Ryan, for those of you who don't know me, and today I will be presenting on the topic of cryonics and its role on Earth and in interstellar travel. So I'm just going to kind of set the stage for cryonics on Earth. So a man lays in his hospital bed. His body is old and decaying, but it's served him well for many years. His mind and spirit, however, are still youthful and craving adventure, but his heart beats on borrowed time. His ECG reading flatlines, and a physician declares the time of death. Not a second after, a team of highly efficient healthcare professionals artificially resume his breathing and blood circulation to stabilize his body and preserve his brain and other large organs. His body is quickly transported to a nearby cryonics facility where his body undergoes further stabilization. His body is now prepped, and he is placed in a vacuum-sealed, liquid nitrogen-cooled chamber where his body may be preserved for theoretically thousands of years. Patiently, he waits for a day which may or may not become, where he is awoken from his frozen slumber and born anew. For this presentation, I'm going to cover a brief description, the science of cryonics, followed by a brief history, some future applications of cryonics on Earth and in space, and lastly, ethical dilemmas associated with the science. Now, what is cryonics? Cryonics is a field of science often associated with feelings of speculation and fictitious belief. However, the technological singularity may allow us to transcend biology and preserve human life long after individuals have surpassed their biological expiration date. Cryonics is the practice of deep freezing individuals who have been declared legally deceased, with hopes of resurrecting their consciousness in the future. It is typically done using liquid nitrogen to expose bodies to temperatures below negative 196 degrees Celsius, and it brings all processes such as metabolism, aging, and deterioration of the body to a standstill. More recently, talks of the potential practice of cryonics with living individuals and tissues has been gaining interest. So a brief history of cryonics. The science actually dates back over 5 decades. Dr. James Bedford was actually the first human to be cryopreserved. In 1967, at the age of 73, he unfortunately passed from an aggressive form of kidney cancer that had spread to his lungs, but his dying wish was for the cryopreservation of his body. After he was pronounced legally dead due to cardiorespiratory arrest, his body was transferred to the care of doctors who were working for the Cryonics Society of California, and his body underwent preparation for cryopreservation. However, due to the early and often primitive nature of cryonics back in the early 70s, it is highly unlikely that the methods used to preserve his body were actually successful in preventing eventual decay. However, to this day, his body remains cryopreserved in sub-zero temperatures in the care of the Alcor Life Extension Foundation, which is a company that's centered around cryonic research and technology. Although the idea that a human body has been preserved for over 5 decades is truly riveting and fascinating, it prompts the question, can these bodies be reanimated? Now, there are a few examples in history where there's been reanimation from a cryo-like state, and one case is the Anna Bagenholm incident. She's known for having the lowest survived body temperature ever recorded. Back in 1999, she was skiing in Norway when she lost control of her skis and was actually trapped headfirst under a layer of ice from a frozen stream. She remained conscious for 40 minutes by breathing in an air pocket that was under the ice. However, after 80 minutes, after 40 minutes, she went unconscious due to hypothermic circulatory arrest. And not until after 80 minutes was she pulled from the icy waters. When she was rescued, she was not breathing, her blood was not circulating, and she had a body temperature of 13.7 degrees Celsius. She went without a heartbeat for over 2 hours and was eventually hooked up to a ventilator to restore breathing. Her blood was actually circulated outside of her body to warm it up through a cardiopulmonary bypass machine. And after 9 hours of meticulous work by hospital staff, she began to show signs of life, although she was paralyzed from the neck down. Shockingly enough, she actually made a full recovery with only minor symptoms of nerve damage in her hands and feet. A physician from the hospital in Norway commented on this incident, saying one thought as to why she was able to survive was that her metabolism had slowed to a point at which the tissues in her body required almost no oxygen. The frigid temperatures from the frozen water were thought to induce a reduction in metabolic rate, which actually slowed down to 1/10 of its baseline, meaning the cells in her body required minimal oxygen to remain viable. Additionally, her brain had become so cold before her heart stopped beating that the brain cells remained undamaged, and essentially they were preserved in a cryo-like state. Now, if metabolic functions can be slowed down naturally for short durations and then reactivated, who's to say that this process can't be extended for longer durations in a controlled setting that's been meticulously designed? The theory behind cryonics, essentially the process takes place in the following steps. A patient is pronounced legally dead by a medical professional, and an emergency cryonics team will stabilize the body by artificially restoring blood circulation and breathing, and they will inject a anticoagulant heparin to prevent blood clotting. And then during the transport to the facility, the body will be cooled in an ice bath. And once at the facility, all the water inside the cells and tissues will be replaced with a glycerol-based chemical solution called the cryoprotectant. This is done because the average human body is composed of 60% water, meaning it's a prevalent compound in human cells, tissues, and organs. And it must be removed before cryopreservation, or the water in the cells and tissues will actually expand as there's a state change, which could potentially crack and shatter the cells, which would do significant damage. The body is placed on dry ice until it cools to a negative 130 degrees Celsius, which is a process known as vitrification. Essentially, it is cooling of the body without the formation of ice. The body is then placed upside down in a vacuum-insulated metal chamber that's filled with liquid nitrogen, which is used to cool the body to its final temperature of negative 196 degrees Celsius. Now the patient can remain in this state until the reanimation process occurs, which is currently impossible with today's cryonics technology. There's a lot of speculation that exists regarding if the significant damage that's done to cells during cryopreservation can be repaired upon the reanimation process. And many experts claim that nanotechnology is the ultimate solution for cell repair at the molecular level. However, these depictions of nanotechnology seem quite far off from what we have in today's world. And that means that either nanotechnology must undergo significant and exponential expansion to carry out the purposes of the science, or another solution will have to be developed for repairing cryopreservation-induced cell damage. Now, there's a few applications of cryonics on Earth. One is being the cryopreservation of patients with terminal diagnoses, such as cancer, liver disease, or pulmonary disease. Individuals who are told by physicians that they have a terminal condition face a harsh, raw reality. And sadly, many of the maladies that actually plague modern medicine are untreatable. However, the question is not if humanity will find a cure, it's when. And hypothetically, patients could undergo cryopreservation before their death occurs, and they could remain in a suspended state until that cure for the disease is found. Then the patient could be reanimated and the cure could be administered. Now, you can apply this same principle of cryopreservation to individuals who are waiting on organ transplant lists. The Health Resources and Service Administration website states that over 106,000 people are registered on the National Organ Transplant Waiting List. And of these people, 17 will die each day waiting for an organ transplant. So cryopreservation may allow individuals to slow their deteriorating condition until it almost stands still, meaning modern medicine could extend the duration a patient can wait for an organ transplant. Ideally, a patient's wait time for an organ will be factored in with their current health condition. And if a physician suspects that they may pass before that organ becomes available, they will recommend cryopreservation. Then if the patient opts for that process, they will remain in a suspended state until the required organ becomes available. Then they'll be reanimated once it becomes available, and they will undergo the transplantation. Now, on the topic of transplantation, another application is the cryopreservation of organs from donors to extend the period in which transplantation may be viable. A statistic from 2017 states that 60% of heart and lung organs are actually discarded each year as they lose their viability after being cut off from the blood supply longer than 4 hours. An estimate from that same study actually suggests that even if 50% of these discarded organs could be still transplanted, the waiting list could be eliminated within 2 to 3 years. In 2017, actually, scientists were successful in cryogenically freezing and rewarming select parts of heart tissue without cracking or shattering the organ. And they were able to induce cryopreservation by infusing the tissues with cryoprotectant solution and magnetic nanoparticles, which were zinc oxide. Now, the organ was put into a vitrified state, and it was warmed by placing this heart in an induction coil, which would generate a magnetic field and actually cause the nanoparticles to vibrate, which would generate heat and slowly warm up the organ. Now, if this process can be scaled to larger organs such as the kidneys and the lungs, cryopreservation may be a critical step in organ transplantation. Cryonics in space. So Cryosleep is a sub-area of cryonics, which is more interested in the cryopreservation of living beings for space travel. Now, it's a concept that's often portrayed in fictional books, movies, and TV shows. I'm sure many of you have seen Christopher Nolan's science fiction film Interstellar, where the long nap is a spin-off of a cryosleep pod that allows the crew of a spacecraft to sleep for extended periods of time while traveling to distant planets. Essentially, this allows the crew to minimize supply consumption, slow the aging process during extended periods of space travel. Now, in a world of nonfiction, cryosleep may push the boundaries of space travel, which would allow astronauts to endeavor on expeditions to distant planets and galaxies. Recently, in a partnership with Spacework Enterprises, NASA has actually begun developments on a cryosleep chamber, which would allow astronauts to sleep for up to 2 weeks at a time while traveling in space. The chamber-induced hibernation would bring metabolic functions to a reduced rate by lowering the body temperature to a point in which they're almost hypothermic. This would mean that nutritional and oxygen needs are minimized and exposure to harmful cosmic radiation could actually be avoided. By minimizing the crew's needs on board, the system mass, power, and volume is reduced, which actually minimizes the risk associated with long-duration space travel. The prospect of human expeditions to other planets is actually much closer to becoming a reality than we may think just because of cryonics. A trip to Mars, which typically takes between 200 to 300 days, depending on the orbital distance between Earth and Mars, has much greater feasibility if astronauts are in cryostasis for 95% of the trip. Ethical dilemmas. So a considerable challenge, it remains a long-standing problem for the implementation of cryonics, is the ethics and legislation that's associated with the topic. So anyone with funding can actually have themselves cryopreserved, but the conditional requirement is that an individual undergoing cryopreservation must first be declared legally dead by a medical professional. Now, this single piece of legislation presents a substantial barrier to the further development of technology in cryonics, and it exists for good reason. Inducing cryostasis essentially requires the cessation of cardiac functions, meaning patients would, in technical terms, be killed during a cryopreservation process. And medical professionals purposely killing patients for long-term preservation poses both ethical and moral dilemmas that must be discussed in higher court settings in the presence of multiple indifferent representatives. And again, it actually goes against one of the pillars of medicine, which is do no harm. Now, a case can be made for cryonics after death by kind of evaluating the traditional two options that exist for individuals who have passed on. Burial and cremation are essentially the two final nails in the coffin after death. So opting for cryopreservation is a rational choice if survival is still possible, no matter how small a percentage. In any case, new legislation regarding the science is essential as it becomes more integrated in our society. Here are my references. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Maybe you learned something. If anyone has any questions, I would be happy to answer them as best as I can.
Okay, maybe you could unshare. Yes, so we can have some discussion. So, you know, this is a kind of unique topic, just at the limits of what we can talk about in a course like this. Many of you would be aware that here at the University of Alberta, there's a strong research group on cryobiology. And what they're studying really doesn't overlap with cryonics. They're freezing single cells and small things like heart valves and corneas and so on. And as Ryan has quite accurately pointed out, we don't really know that cryonics will work. Now, it does work at a very primitive level. You can freeze worms and bring them back to life. And you can freeze a rabbit kidney and 30% of the time get the rabbit kidney to function. But there's very poor understanding of why 70% of the rabbit kidneys that you freeze don't work and 30% do. And you can imagine that if your consciousness was brought back without fixing the other things, that it'd be worse than being dead, because using techniques of the present day, it's not just microscopic injury, but actually like rents or fractures in the skin surface as the body is frozen, that would be amazingly painful and bleed and so on. But still, it's obviously something worth trying, and it's just at kind of the edge of legitimate science versus pseudoscience. Pseudoscience would be if there was no chance of it working at all, or if the chance was very low. And it's kind of at an intermediate point. Yeah, so there was a question. I think one of the students had a question. I don't want to do all the talking here. Did this subject surprise you, or did you all already know everything about this? Yeah, let's have some reaction. So Pre says, yeah, let me look at the chat here. Very interesting topic. Medium knowledge, yes, okay. All right. Yeah. Okay, well, I think we could move on. And so, Pre, would you like to go next?
Hi, yeah, of course. I can do that. It's just my laptop is not really doing well today, so I got kicked out of the meeting like once already. So like if that happens, I'll just quickly come back. So I apologize.
Okay. Yeah.
But
so I have your presentation here. Let's see.
I'll just say like, I don't know, like next slide at the.
Yeah, I may let me just go back and yeah, I'm not immediate. I saw it here for sharing before. Let me just, yeah, I'm gonna have to go back to my mail and bring it up to the top of the queue here. Just a second.
Sorry, this is so inconvenient, but I don't know what's happening with my laptop, to be honestly.
So let's see here. Slideshow. me go back now to Zoom and see if I can see it there. There it is. Okay, cool. All right. And let's see, how do I get it? Slideshow. There we go. Okay. So start from beginning. Okay. There you go.
Okay, thank you very much. So hello everyone, my name is Pri, and today I'm just going to present you a couple of ideas and just a design that may be the end of the Alzheimer's. So we can go to the next slide. So we're just going to walk through the disease together and just identify the causation of its harms and just explore a way to turn our ideas into reality. If you can go to the next slide. Thank you very much. To have it more organized, I'm just gonna stick with a diagram with this one that we can see right now. So if Alzheimer's disease is what we have identified as our like quote unquote problem, we should explore a little deeper just to define a more detailed problem, just because what causes or leads to Alzheimer's is technically what we're trying to come up with a design for, right? So just like the experience that we had in Shauna's online session, when we just came up with a hypothetical design that could be a more sustainable and improved internet company. In being innovative in medicine, although facing more limitations is just more likely in healthcare related issues, we should still be wild with our ideas and just never restrict ourselves to the research that has been done already. So let's just be creative while we also look back and see how much we must compromise, how much we what kind of risks we have, and just identify the drawbacks. Now next slide, please. So in the background, I'm just gonna, next one. And one more, perfect. In the background, I'm just gonna define the disease, which is just a brain disorder that slowly destroys memory and just thinking skills, and it eventually takes the ability to do the easiest tasks away. It was discovered by Dr. Alois Alzheimer after examination of a person who just died due to an unknown disease. The main observed features included abnormal clumps that are now called as amyloid plaques, and as well as just like tangled bundles of fiber that are now known as neurofibrillary tangles. Slide, please. There are many factors that leads to Alzheimer's that I assume many of us have at least heard of. First of all is just a general health condition such as history of heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, and etc. They just like increase the likelihood of some person getting Alzheimer's, and honestly, many other diseases, it's not just Alzheimer's. Moving on to the environmental factors, as we know, pollution play an important role in humans and just in general our planet health, which I will come back to these environmental factors later throughout the presentation, but I will mainly focus on genetic factors. Slide, please. So there are two types of genes that are defined to cause diseases. One of them is the deterministic genes that will definitely make a person sick. And there's also some risk genes that will only increase the chances of the person develop the disease. Slide. So according to research, two risk genes have been identified that lead to Alzheimer's. First one is APOE gene. That is an autosomal dominant gene we all receive. There are just many variants of this particular gene, such as APOE E2 and APOE E3. that are not considered to be risk genes. Occurrence of particular mutations will make APOE4 variant that is known to be a risk gene. It's involved in producing beta amyloid and later on the production of plaques that are known to be one of the main factors in Alzheimer's disease. The next gene is called MAPT. This gene produces proteins called tau proteins. These proteins are present in our cerebrospinal fluid. They are involved in neurofibrillary tangles production, and some certain mutations lead to this protein detaching from microtubules, and it sticks to other tau proteins to form the tangles, which technically disrupts our neurotransmitters. Slide, please. Thank you. Just one previous one. Thank you. No, it's the previous one. And then again, one before. Okay. There's one before, and then just to perfect right here. Thank you. Sorry. So there are two ways to discover whether it's one next to this one. It's a testing, the one with testing. I'm so sorry.
So test
after.
Okay. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. There are two ways to discover whether we have a copy of these risk genes or not. First of all, taking a genetic test will confirm individual's genotype, and it's just pretty reliable. There's an old-fashioned type of genetic testing, which will take longer to give us the result back. And with the help of technology, that everything is just easier. We can, with the help of machine learning, we can just do another type of genetic testing that's so much easier and it's so much quicker. And then furthermore, since proteins usually appear in the bloodstream, even with a simple blood test, we can just like observe the tau proteins or beta amyloids, and then you can just like confirm the carriage of risk genes. Although it's known that if tau proteins are found in the bloodstream, the person is at a higher, like relatively higher risk than other patients. Now, slide, please. Back to our diagram, we have identified that the issue is plaques produced by beta amyloids and tangles produced by tau proteins. Or from another approach, we can say that lacking the substance in our brain that's responsible for us learning, thinking, and taking actions in order to just doing our daily tasks is another way of just looking at it and identifying our issue. Now let's see what we can do. Next. It's one before this slide. Perfect. And I will explore possible ways to just reduce the chances of getting Alzheimer's. After realizing that we are in fact lacking something to have a better life, we must just think about the exact steps that's needed to be taken in order to fix the introduced issue. Next slide. If the plaques and tangles are removed from our nervous system, the problem is considered to be solved. Now, in order to get rid of these plaques and tangles, we must inhibit protein production, and for that, we must either prevent mutation or just silence the genes that are mutated. So since most mutations are spontaneous, and it's just relatively harder to prevent spontaneous mutations, just silencing target genes is just our way to go. For example, we can have like a protein inhibitory RNA vaccine that can be just the answer to all of our needs. Or from another approach, if the amount of growth factors that are responsible for already existing neurons increases, or if we can just somehow inject such factors to our some brain regions, the problem is once again considered to be solved. Or from another approach, if we just learn better with the help of, for example, virtual reality, the problem is once again considered to be solved. Slide, please. Thank you. It's a one before this one. Thank you. So as I bet many of you know, RNA vaccines are just bio-designed RNAs that enter our cells and have various functionalities depending on the type of RNA that's like present in the vaccine. For example, with like Pfizer vaccines that are just mRNA vaccines, and they meant to produce the specific protein in order to increase our immunity against coronavirus. RNA vaccines have many advantages over the traditional types of vaccines. For example, it's just they're non-infectious form of vaccine, so it's so much safer. And then humans just showed a better and more efficient immune system response. And then the design is just so much easier and so much quicker. Like not easier, but like the second that you get the hang of it, it's so much easier to design. As the technology also expands, the cost also decreases. And since there's just less chemicals used in it, it's just more environmentally friendly, which just going back to the environmental factors that also cause so many diseases. Now slide again. So overall, RNA vaccines are much more sustainable, and sustainability in medicine matters according to principles of ethics in medicine. It's just important to pay attention to different aspects of a study. There may be a single good outcome within a study, but there may also be many harmful outcomes that humans tend to pay less of an attention to. Slide again. So according to our diagram, now we have explored so much, and it's time to probably take action towards designing what will most likely be the end of Alzheimer's disease. Slide again. That's why I'm introducing our first design, which is the RNA vaccines, and then we can just go to the next slide again. As I previously mentioned, RNA molecules are very diverse, so therefore there's a variety of functions defined for different RNAs in our body. siRNAs, for example, are just small interfering RNAs that act in inhibiting protein production by silencing the target gene. Instead of me explaining it, we can just watch a video. It's 5 minutes. It's kind of long, but it perfectly explains like how it works in a cell. We can watch it or we can skip it. I don't know. It's in the next slide. It's kind of long. It's 5 minutes. But it really helped me understand how it works. So if we have the time, we can maybe watch a little bit of it.
So are you hearing it?
No.
No. Okay. So what I need to do is to share the sound. Just a second here. Okay. Share sound. See what happens now. Okay, now I think you'll hear it.
Scientists have been making rapid progress in understanding RNA interference, or RNAi. Many organisms use RNAi to control genes, and it can also be used as a tool in the laboratory, and in the future perhaps as a therapy. This animation will introduce you to the principles of RNAi involving two important types of RNA molecule, small interfering RNAs and microRNAs. Eukaryotic cells have many sophisticated ways of controlling gene expression. In the complex environment of a cell, these mechanisms need to be precisely targeted. There's a group of mechanisms that use small RNA molecules to direct gene silencing. This is called RNAi. Inside the nucleus, most genes that encode proteins are transcribed by RNA polymerase II. The primary RNA transcript is processed by splicing and forms a mature messenger RNA, sometimes called mRNA. The messenger RNA is then exported from the nucleus into the cytoplasm. Here, ribosomes catalyze translation of the messenger RNA to form polypeptide chains that fold into proteins. But this is also where some small RNA molecules can have their silencing effects. There are several types of regulatory small RNA. Small interfering RNAs, known as siRNAs, are derived from longer double-stranded RNAs that are either produced in the cell itself or are delivered into cells experimentally. The introduction of siRNAs, or double-stranded RNA, is widely used to manipulate gene expression. MicroRNAs are another type of small RNA. Most microRNAs come from RNAs that are transcribed in the nucleus, which then fold and are processed before being exported into the cytoplasm as double-stranded precursor microRNAs. The double-stranded precursors of
The video introduces two types of RNA, so the one that I was talking about is that public one. So I think we can just like go to the next slide.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Let me see. Second idea.
Now our second idea just explores the possibility to reverse the progression of neurological disorders with gene therapy. With a gene therapy approach, we can release specific proteins into target damaged brain regions in patients suffering from Alzheimer's. There are proteins that are in charge of the survival of already existing neurons, and those proteins are supposed to also promote growth within brain cells. With gene therapy, we can offer an injection of mentioned protein complexes to damaged brain regions to promote growth while also restoring the surroundings. Slide, please. Moreover, in virtual reality space, we may potentially be also able to influence learning and treat memory loss in Alzheimer's. Like, I remember that in Shauna's session, we were talking about how, like, I'm not sure if there was a study that was done or we were just talking about, like, it was just an idea of like cows that were like actually in a very bad environment, but with virtual reality, let's say we can like virtually expose them to like a better, much better environment, and they were just like, the milks were perfect and they were reproducing perfectly. So I don't know, I just thought maybe this can also be something we can just like trick our brain, be like, you can learn. Slide. During this presentation, we explored Alzheimer's disease and innovative treatments that will cure and counteract disease progression. This is really important since such disease represents a worldwide challenge affecting our global economy and the rise of healthcare costs. They also negatively impact the life quality. Therefore, promoting effective preventing measures would be needed to reduce the worsening of conditions in clinical interventions. All mentioned ideas are just an innovation in medicine. They can prevent many diseases, including Alzheimer's, by making an RNA vaccine, for example, that targets APOE, E4, and MAP2 genes. There will be no more beta amyloid or tau protein production. Therefore, there will be no more interruption in our nervous system regarding plaques and tangles. In order to make them even more environmentally friendly and ethical, we can also make vaccines like biological tablets that people can take just like any other pill instead of carrying them in glass vials. That's just like what we do right now. This will itself reduce the pollution and less of diseases caused by pollution. It improves the overall life standards, and it's the next step towards technological civilization. Slide, please. Now, according to our beloved diagram, we must now look back to see how much we have compromised, or what are the drawbacks of such technology developments in like vaccine industry, or is there any other drawbacks in like other ideas that I mentioned? Next slide. You just can remember anything but next. Next one. So there are two immediate drawbacks to the vaccine technology. Since its target a specific encoded gene, it's also possible for the vaccine to target another gene that's very similarly encoded to the actual target gene. This will increase the chances of like mutations. But the good news is that our body has many processes that are responsible to check for mutations. And even if there is a mutation, they may be neutral. Chances are still not exactly zero, but maybe close to zero. And as previously mentioned, allergic reactions are not likely, but not zero, and not and the severity of allergic reactions are not also common. About injecting growth promoting proteins, the size of the injected proteins is relatively large according to studies. Therefore, the endocytosis to the cell may be difficult, in which a virus can also be designed to cause like a very specific mutation in our plasma membrane to let the protein in, which itself again could be risky, but there can be experiments. And about virtual reality, a possible issue could be sometimes the positive steps that like creatures take with the help of virtual reality is only just valid while they have the glasses on, and the results may not be permanent. So we can just always trick our brain. And next slide. And again, next slide. So a possible solution is just to try to do as many experiments that's just humanly possible to make sure the risks are minimized for protein for patients because of the protein-based vaccines or the rest of the ideas. Experiments are done on just alive organisms like mice, but one thing to think about is that is it really ethical? In order to do the best we can to provide the best, most ethical, and most effective technology for healthcare-related concerns, scientists, companies, and providers must pay attention to many different aspects of an invention while it's still an idea. Therefore, with the help of machine learning, we can minimize the possible risks and negative impacts with the help of algorithms and logic and programming instead of actually experimenting on alive organisms, and not which is not very ethical, and it's also time consuming. Slide. So to end this presentation with a discussion, we learned, like in our class, we learned that singularity is very much near, and suggested designs are all the next step towards reaching singularity. But is this considered to be an advantage or not? That's one thing that I couldn't really figure out myself. Depends on what perspective you're kind of just like having, but yeah, if anyone wants to answer.
Okay. Any questions? Ryan and Misbah.
Oh, I didn't have a question. I just wanted to say that it was just really well done, and I like the concepts that you explored. So I thought that was really cool. Yeah, good job.
Okay. Ryan, was something you wanted to say, or Noor?
No, I was just going to say, yeah, it was really interesting, really well done, and kind of an approach to Alzheimer's that I've never really seen or heard of before. So I thought that was really, really interesting.
Great. Okay. So the last presentation is by Ariha. And are you ready to share your slides? Yeah, cool. Very good.
I will get that there. And can you see my slides okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, thanks for coming and viewing my presentation, everyone. So yeah, I'm going to be going over medical issues that are faced by female astronauts and then how AI and technology can be implemented to combat these medical issues. So here's a little outline of what I'll be going over today. So first, I'll be giving a bit of historical context regarding women's health and the relationship women's health has with spaceflight. Specifically, I'll touch on the lack of research regarding women's health and spaceflight and the knowledge gap that has resulted because of this lack of research. So secondly, I'll be going over specific medical issues that are faced by women during spaceflight due to anatomical differences between male astronauts and female astronauts. Some female astronaut body systems are put at increased medical risks. So I'll be giving an overview about what some of these increased medical risks are. Thirdly, I'm going to look at how AI and technology can potentially be applied and implemented to these issues in the future to reduce these risks that are faced by astronauts when completing spaceflight. So first, why worry about women's health in space? So given that I think personally, it's very critical to investigate like how sex impacts human spaceflight in order to ensure the safety of all astronauts. Though spaceflight is important for like research and exploration, I think one of the utmost like primary concerns is the safety of the astronauts that take part in spaceflight. So then given that women account for around 11% of all astronauts, there is a significant data gap that must be addressed when developing space technology for mixed crew space missions in the future. So why worry about women's health in space? Additionally, women are becoming more and more involved in spaceflight, which is really great. So NASA, as well as the Canadian Space Agency and other space organizations have voiced intentions to have both women and men equally represented on future trips to Mars and to the moon, so as well as in commercial spaceflight as well. So therefore, as a result, research into female health in space, as well as the development of risk mitigation strategies and technologies should be addressed and are really essential to ensure the safety of these astronauts. So next, I'll be giving a little bit of historic context around women's involvement in spaceflight. So in 1963, Valentina Tereshkova became the first woman to go to space. So after this, no woman went to space for almost 20 years. So there was a significant gap there. The USSR had sent Svetlana Savitskaya to space in 1982. And then this was followed by the US sending the first American woman to space. And this was Sally Ride in 1983. So as you can see, there weren't a lot of female astronauts going to space within this time, as well as they were spaced apart. So this alone created a major data gap in understanding the effects space has on women. And for example, if we look at the Apollo era with the lunar missions, all of the Apollo astronauts were men. Subsequently, women have been sent regularly to space, but the numbers are still not close enough to fill the major gaps in understanding of female health and the relationship it has with space. So now if we jump to the early 2000s, major space agencies are starting to really work on understanding the impact sex has on adaptation to space. So in 2002, NASA and the University of Missouri had a workshop to identify research priorities related to sex-based differences in adaptation to space. So they examined available data and they created recommendations to fill existing knowledge gaps on this topic. Then if we jump to 2011, a report published by the National Academy of Sciences in the Life Sciences of Space Exploration voiced the need to thoroughly understand sex disparities. And then as a result, NASA and the National Space Biomedical Research Institute commissioned research in 2013 and put out 6 papers on the effects of sex and gender in adaptation in space. So I gave this bit of historical background just so you get an idea of even when we just started spaceflight and just started the industry in the late 50s and early 60s, considering sex and gender and how that implements spaceflight and how that deals with astronauts' health was considered a bit later in the industry. So next, I'll be going over risks that are observed to be higher in female astronauts in comparison to their male counterparts. I'll be going over a few different body systems, the first being the musculoskeletal system. So women tend to have lower muscle density and more reproductive tissues in comparison to their male counterparts. And this results in them being at a higher risk for radiation damage. So in spaceflight, this has led to fewer missions and shorter duration missions for female astronauts, which does put them at a disadvantage. So also, these differences between male and female astronauts are not only important when considering their health and safety, but also when considering the opportunities they get in the field. Secondly, in the immune system, spaceflight is known to alter immune response. So female astronauts tend to show a stronger immune response compared to their male counterparts. So this ends up manifesting a higher rate of autoimmune diseases in the female astronauts. Next, when we look at the neurosensory system, so female astronauts are much more sensitive to stimuli such as touch, pressure, and temperature. So female astronauts have reported motion sickness more frequently than their male counterparts. And this has been motion sickness both when they initially enter space as well as when they're re-entering Earth after completing spaceflight. And then when looking at the cardiovascular system through prolonged bed rest studies, so these studies simulated microgravity, female astronauts have shown higher risks of post-flight orthostatic intolerance. So Shauna had also touched on this in her lectures, and this is the inability to stand for extended periods of time without fainting. So this is obviously another health concern worth researching and looking more into. And then finally, with the morphology and anthropometry systems, so female astronauts are at a higher risk when spacesuits and life support systems are designed for male models. So since the initial astronauts were all male astronauts, these systems have continuously been designed for their male models, so they aren't specifically customized for these female astronauts. So women on average have shorter stature and airways, smaller lungs, and hence less lung diffusion capacity. So this is not always the case with every female astronaut, but this is just, they tend to have these qualities. And then so NASA, for example, one instance where this issue kind of came to light was that NASA's initial all-female spacewalk was originally scheduled to take place March 2019, but it had to be canceled because they did not have two space suits that would appropriately fit the female astronauts. So the all-female spacewalk was carried out in October of that year, but I think that's an important piece to note, how the lack of proper technology for female astronauts can cause unexpected delays with the research and exploration happening. So this is just another quick image to show you can see the difference in like posture and proportions between males and females and how this can eventually affect how they fit in their spacesuits. So next, I'll be looking at how AI and technology potentially can be used to address these risks. So when looking at the musculoskeletal system, just to recap, the risk we'll be addressing is that lower muscle density and more reproductive tissues put female astronauts at a higher risk of radiation damage. So then wearable radiation shielding is not an entirely new concept. It has been designed for first responders and military members, but then looking at the future, this technology can be adapted to be suited for spaceflight. So a radiation shielding vest would provide mobility. It would provide more mobility than spacesuits would, which are primarily worn during spacewalks, but not during day-to-day life within space architecture, for example, in the International Space Station. So the radiation shielding vest would provide astronauts with this protected mobility when they're traveling between different elements within the architecture. So this design would also protect the most susceptible vital organs, including bone marrow, reproductive organs, and lungs from the effects of radiation. Also, I am noticing we're nearing the end of class. So also if anybody needs to head out, like that's completely okay. If you have somewhere else to run to, that's all good. And then so next, when considering the health of female astronauts who have more reproductive tissues compared to their male astronauts, this would further protect them. Additionally, wearable vests take up minimal space. So this is important since efficient use of mass and space is critical for long duration human flight missions. And then additionally, artificial intelligence can be used to help astronauts detect radiation peaks. If artificial intelligence sensors are put on future space architecture and vehicles, this can allow space organizations, whether public or private, to schedule astronaut activities around these radiation peaks. Therefore, this would protect the astronauts from unnecessary exposure to radiation and then further protect their health. So next one, looking at the immune system, the issue I'll be addressing is that the female astronauts show stronger immune responses compared to their male astronaut counterparts, and therefore manifest a higher rate of autoimmune diseases. So a bed rest study that simulated microgravity conducted by NASA was carried out to investigate the effect exercise and nutrition will have on immunological responses in female astronauts. These findings did show that specialized exercise routines increase immune response considerably. So then when considering how AI and technology can play a factor in this, I think specifically we can draw our attention to immersive technology. So this can directly be implemented to help improve exercise programs for astronauts. For example, virtual reality can be utilized for astronaut workout programs and might incentivize them to want to work out even more. So for example, putting astronauts in settings such as outdoor hikes or yoga studios would make exercise much more appealing, especially if they're slightly isolated from Earth. And this might also help combat feelings of isolation. So I just have a video. I just want to show a few quick seconds of what this VR might look like. So in this video here, you can just see that this VR can look like going through a hike in the woods, which would be more appealing for astronauts who currently aren't home to rather than like walking on a treadmill or lifting weights. So additionally, when looking at the immune system, this can be advanced to be put in like live real time where astronauts could potentially partake in exercise alongside family members or friends who are here on Earth. So to my knowledge, this isn't technology that exists currently, but would be something that might be interested to see develop in the future because this could help them combat feelings of isolation and encourage them to partake in exercise and make the exercise experience more enjoyable for them. So next one, looking at the neurosensory system, the issue that we were looking at is female astronauts reported motion sickness more frequently than their male counterparts. So exercise programs were also suggested as a countermeasure for motion sickness experienced by female astronauts. But since we already touched on how that could be improved with AI and technology, I'm going to be focusing more on medical and pharmaceutical countermeasures. So these have been recommended to combat motion sickness, and artificial intelligence can be implemented as a pharmaceutical tool in spaceflight. So in-person consultations with a pharmacist would not be accessible to astronauts when they are in space unless one of the astronauts is a pharmacist. So an automated pharmaceutical system could improve astronauts' experience in pharmaceutical care. So this could look, for example, like a technology for organizing medicine, counting out medication, and filling prescriptions when necessary. I think this would further allow improve pharmaceutical care for astronauts in space when they just don't have access to the pharmacists we do at home. And then when looking at cardiovascular system, the issue we were looking at was addressing female astronauts showing a higher risk of post-flight orthostatic intolerance. So to combat this higher risk, technology simulated artificial intelligence could be utilized. So this is not exactly a new technology, but the thing that researchers are currently working on is finding the ideal combination of artificial gravity magnitude, frequency, and duration needed to prevent cardiovascular deconditioning. So they're still working on what the right combination of these factors is, but working on this could allow female astronauts to be phased into Earth's gravity when they return to spaceflight. And if this is done gradually over a number of days, this could reduce the effects of orthostatic intolerance. And then lastly, when looking at morphology and anthropometry systems, to counter the risks posed by ill-fitting spacesuits, significant advances in spacesuit design need to be made. So the first thing that came to mind for me was customizable designs. So this would enable any astronaut, regardless of their sex or any other physical characteristics, to wear well-fitted spacesuits to maximize their performance and reduce any related hazards. So this could include, for example, optional padding they could implement into their spacesuits, as well as belts, etc., where it could just be a more customizable design to make sure that it fits all the astronauts properly. And then, so that's my presentation for today. I just looked at how female astronauts are uniquely affected by spaceflight, and then how technology and AI could hypothetically be implemented to address the medical issues they face. I also wanted to quickly mention Dr. Pandya, who served as my mentor for my presentation. And then those are all the works that I cited. And then I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has any. I'll stop sharing here.
So, you know, this presentation was kind of historic. You did something no one has ever done in the 11-year history of the course, which was, you know, the course teaching period specifically ends at 3:20, and at 3:19, you sort of told people if they have to leave in the next minute, that's fine, and so on. And it shows a kind of self-assurance and being on top of things. Very often when students are presenting, they seem completely overwhelmed, like they can't handle anything else. And that was like an extra detail. It was so cool. I also feel that if somebody watches Shauna's lecture and then watches the presentation you've just given, they sort of very well complement each other, you know? And like you were talking about aspects of being female that she didn't actually mention some of them. So it's really cool from that point of view. And it's a little bit like Simon Wu sort of made another kind of history in the course. He gave a presentation when he was taking the course about the quantum aspects of sight and smell that actually went beyond what the lecturer was talking about at that time. And so the lecturer, Jack Tazinski, actually added Simon's topics to his subsequent lectures. So sorry for getting so excited about this, but you know, there's a certain sameness when you've taught a course for 11 years, and even though the teaching sessions are very different every term, and it's really, really exciting to see something brand new happen like this. Yeah, so anyway, yeah, any other questions? I see that Nimna Mendes has joined us. Do you have any questions or comments? Anyway, trying to get more interaction going here, so it's not just me talking. Yeah. Or anyone else? Yeah. So we have 4 more presentations next time on Thursday. I think they'll be of similar quality to today. They include a grade 11 high school student from Calgary. It's kind of stealth, right? I don't think you've ever met him on Zoom. His name is Michael Liu, but he will be presenting on Thursday. And that also breaks new ground. We haven't ever had a presentation from somebody that young in the course. And Kashika S. from India, she's been taking the course, but she didn't feel that she could give a presentation this term, but next term in fall of 2022, we'll have a 15-year-old giving a presentation. How about that, eh? So any other comments? Very interesting topic. Great job, Ryan says. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. And we'll see you here on Thursday. I also wanted to mention that you all performed well on the midterm. Some years, the range of grades in the midterm is like amazing, from like 20 to 97. And we're not seeing that this time. So you guys are sort of clustered closer together. So the lowest student is closer to the highest student, which is a very healthy thing. We have coped with those remarkably low scores in the past, but it doesn't look like we have that to cope with this time. So anyway, congratulations to all of you for your good performance on the midterm. Okay, I'll see you on Thursday. Thank you very much.